Okay. Good afternoon to one and all present here, and welcome to the second day of the Meera Memorial Paper Reading Competition. Firstly, let's run through the rules again for all our participants. Each team will have a total of 12 minutes for the presentation, followed by a 5-minute question and answer session with the judges. A buzzer will sound once at the 10-minute mark as a heads up, and again at the 12-minute to signal that it's time to wrap up the presentation. Please note that exceeding the time limit will result in a penalty in your final scores. So do keep an eye on the clock. Participants will be judged across 5 criteria: the depth and accuracy of their content and understanding, the clarity and interpretation of their ideas, the quality of their presentation and communication, the effectiveness of their visual aids and overall organization, and finally, the performance in the Q&A round. The decision of the judges will be final and the results will be declared in due course. And a quick note for our audience: the floor will be open to your questions after the judges have had their turn asking questions. So we request you all to hold your questions until the last and don't interrupt in between the presentation. We also request everyone to please put your phones on silent for the duration of the presentation. So let's begin with the presentations. I would like to call on Nilanjana Bakshi from Miranda House to present on the topic reconstructing gamma ray burst energy relations in neural network frames. Well,
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nilanjana Kanchi. the presenting the part of my system and the presentation. And as in after and presentation, and working on its position as the common and the my position of the constructing government vast energy vision with observation of the human. Firstly, is complete the background of what we are using government. Here are some hidden public cosmic systems more recent population. First, we have the zero differential spheres supernovas, followed by galaxy quasars and gamma rays, where the population in family family, the Indian and rocket degradation. Here, as you can see, the supernovas are only here to vegetate. Galaxy and quasars range from 3 to 5 regions. It otherwise has with the highest range from music from different inspired to thinking up to 9 months spreadsheet and only for the basic data. So why we so there are position to the company cost machine status so the basic first of all it's a funding company cost supply data and series on the supply data. Now, the main motivation for Dhamma exams is giving us information about the expansion rate of the universe in a redshift that is not easily accessible by the standard cosmological times and time. For the purpose, we mainly study the energy emissions of the Dhamma gas, study the emission between the peak and the isotopic energy. I have included formulas for the emission because in the power or in the space. So I think that's the calculated atomic energy is the luminosity distance of the Dhamma bus, which is non-calculated as an observable as particles and parts and areas. So in the usual methods as part of calculation, it's mainly calculated from using a specific cosmological standard models such as time per second. And then the luminosity distance is calculated from nearby from the assumption that you have a constant has certain values depending on time, evolution time prior to being right. So if that is anywhere equals 69.3 to 70, depending on whichever data set we are using for the our motivation validated here will not take into account any assumptions that what will be the standard cosmological rate. Instead of that, we will be use certain observational data sets. Use neural networks to reconstruct the data for separate from the points that you are inserted, and then use it of the constraint and relations. Now, here I have a brief flow of what you are only do. First is we have chosen a very standard operational data set that is operational of the data of this components. Secondly, we have approaching using two different approaches in neural network because the first one is artificial neural network and the second one is rational neural network. After we reconstruct the data set in relation to certain redshift edge, that is required for a calibration method, which calibrates the numeric dots. So, summary was numeric business, and we calculate and constrain the alpha dimension. And use two data sets, speed is holding up against for network modeling, is holding up against the changes in data oscillation via depending on sometimes indicator. So it's energy and manage energy. And then we can also the public parameters for now for the addition of network is built up on the then component minerals and middle layers. Here we have include layer the current data of 30. Second thing for the after one given rating, each of the neurons, here are the examples for the two-layer ability neural network, but in my paper, I usually working we use only one. It's only for the bigger purpose. After during the training, each of the neurons were assigned a value depending on how the data set itself is correlated to the student. Furthermore, the results of each of the neurons were different weights and biases they have got discrimination from this formula. Then the results are then calculated next neurons of the next year, but we again train them and try to find the weights and the biases. And finally, for the output layer, there was set of weights and biases, which we can define the overlays of how the data is computed in certain directions. And this can give us the climate and the prediction for whichever direction range that we need for the prediction. Typically, and for each case, conclusion in a model, we need to define a model like how we are, because in each case there is big model parameters, and each of the model parameters need to affect the final prediction. So we have optimized four different parameters here. First one is the number of neurons, the number of hidden layers, the number of epochs, necessary for reconstruction, and the activation function. Now, as you can see in the nature exam, for the number of neurons, for two neurons is maybe underpinning the data set, but it's not able to properly optimize the content or too many neurons can confuse unnecessary complexity and middle secondly, we have estimates the number of training epochs, amount is necessary to go through. If it has too many epochs, it will lead to unnecessary risk. And we have too many epochs, and that is and optimize the number of layers. As you can see that we have always actually been bit search for first four layers. And except for the touchstone of the data to the ports to oscillations, especially in the certain region like between 1.1 to 1.5 square. So we have chosen only one way necessary to demonstrate the other type of for application. Then after we have done defined the model, we work on the cross validation. So I think we checking that if our model is only memorizing the data or if it's able to predict the data in the direction we have understood before. For each case, what we do is we have 30 data points. In each case, they create only 31 points and they try to predict the one point that we give out. You can see that most of our data set is prediction is in one sigma. So it's predicting for the unseen points in a bit of sensitivity. Furthermore, take the data set and this is for the data set as artificial intelligence does not provide any uncertainty for the manipulation. It can, however, cache the uncertainty data because subscription is very noisy for the higher edition. So we submitted the bootstrap family by we from the 32 points, we have 42 points. For each case, it is sampling. So some points are reaching, some points are duplicated. It can capture the electric uncertainty or the database uncertainty very well. And this is the minor prediction we got for the parameter data, and this is very consistent with the standard dynamics given the group as well. Following the approach, I utilize Bayesian neural network, which we utilize Bayesian. The instead of having a point to aspiration, and we're getting some kind of neural network, we instead get a distribution of how the weights, depending on the data. This is supposed to be the distribution of the weights. If this is the distribution of weights, what will be the other kind of participation? Only the new solution of the model, we again reconstruct the research and reconstruct the Bayesian neural network. The difference between the artificial and traditional neural network model can be illustrated in the fact that we predictions in Bayesian neural network model can facilitate the uncertainty that is coming from the data. So that is very much. Second, we also integrate the model uncertainty that is coming from the model. Because model choice parameters affect the pattern outcome. So with that, we have done the comparison from standard lambda city improvements where the model constant is 69.3 and omega method is 0.50. And as far as it go on, predictions are very consistent with the standard diversity model, except for the high region because as it's evident that it has the high regions separately for the points about are very high. So that might lead to deviations. Then comparison from we can what the engineer predictions have been for as as for the artificial neural network models, it has single point value of weights that is generated after training the data. as compared with racial states near the exclusion of the race. Finally, I have added a comparison for differential methods can be more suitable for the constitution. So, as far as we are concerned, racial identity comes from features specifically we have the law control when the utilizing the racial differences of is compared with artificial knowledge. And it was much more less to make of the hypertensive. Following that, we have classified among our relations and we are making manufacturing multi-value and a and these are the control plots that we are waiting for both the methods. As it's evident that it's nearly identical except having the materials of its unconventional students. So later, this time and this time simplifying the non-testing is there's not actually need that much complex architecture to define the underlying data and the data set has single correlation and that it can be eminently captured by global models. I have shared the constraints over the levels and and we see the all is mainly very similar to 15.441 and 1.2 numbers. It does not is not problem much deviation from the standard levels. And finally, for the constellation purpose, we have constructed the Americas of the diagram, what is to propagate the elements and the gain conditions on a standard capacity model form when the solid line is coming from the plan wire and the dash line is coming from the shoes wire, which is derived from the there is a consistent across all the methods, and there's again the model is getting provides much more better conceptual analysis and better identification. And here on the derivation the window provides a much more robust approach as compared to the window of methods and this has much more participants in information. And I have for the references I have this is currently available as a preprint in archive and it's under it is accepted in European Physical Journal C and I have added the reference for the archive. Mhm.
Yeah, you can ask questions. Almost was overtime. Overtime was only 13 seconds. 13 seconds. 3 seconds. You have to go for normal redshift, you measure the redshifts comparing the spectral lines. Or the redshifts of gamma ray does redshift of gamma ray does all the measure.
They are trying to measure from standard candidates that in English. There is a special relationship that intelligence that is called the dynamic relationships, which are also used for coverage. In there, they what they discuss is you cannot actually you cannot there is in the specifically the satellite data sets unless it's very calibrated there is no specific data sheets given and it's also given at error bar. So they compare it with standard candles that is available as supernovas to be and then they try to derive the redshift from the observable data.
A redshift is connected to visible property of the process generating the relief. So what property of gamma radiation is used for finding determining the redshift?
So it is it's an so I think that how much if the light that is coming from is shifted is finding the redshift.
How much is that? Please repeat.
How much is the spectra is shifting?
Spectrum is 50. So 50 days you compare to something which you know. If you don't know what you're comparing, it would be not finding the shift.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. When you're showing initially the risk factors, they haven't changed, whatever the axis.
that was not
The menu change,
we want a cross validation that we are that talking about this
very early.
this is from the this
One before. Right.
so here even
Wow, what is the this is so the risk factor is highly affected by the
we should the when we are doing the reconstruction for the added shift like in the added shift we have the error bars are quite big enough. So if you are taking less number of neurons, instead of going through the number of neurons, it kind of takes in a straight flat line. And instead of going like this, it kind of goes like this. Even though the high red bars, the reflector coming from the high red shift is not that much accounted while you're taking the reflector. Because it's getting scaled by because it has very high uncertainty, it's getting scaled for the later points. And we mainly want to mainly on the house and it was for the higher exit point because we have very high range from there these we are go up these one series specific physical data set they are going up to from 0.05 to 9.
No, so in short, the risk factor is the kind of deviation or the poorness of the thing, right? And the number of neurons is like the order of the complexity of the model, correct?
So even if we're using less neurons, but it just each takes if you have 30 data points, for the output of each neuron, you have omega 1, x1, omega 2, x2, like that. So here each of the data points are going up to 50, are going up to 50 with a certain weightage. When you have less number of neurons, then it gets much less number of parameters. In the lesser redshift region, specifically for when you're doing
Yeah, so the only question I wanted to ask was a very small difference in the risk doesn't really tell you much about the number of neurons you should use. Uh, that consideration will be based on something else, right?
Because in what I got opportunity for this, in specifically for the Hubble parameter reconstructions, the only the risk factor is like traditionally used as an validation. But then we're concerned, also concerned with that risk is not actually very much changing when you are doing the risk. So it was coming out to be low for a very high value of 4096 neurons, which is quite absurd as compared to the number of data points for the Hubble parameter is only 30. So, but
That's the overfitting process, right?
yes, sir, because that was the main concept we got. So what we did was that we did this cross validations that we mainly use. So we are hiding one point in each case. Then you are trying to predict that point. Is this overfitting? Because if it's overfitting, then it won't come between one signal. So I think it's the purpose of the factor is to give statistical validation to our choice of neurons and rather than to be the only factor behind binary shift.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to call Rida Fahim from St. Stephen's College presenting on the topic analyzing non-linear dynamics of bristly in reservoir computing. I would also like to tell that Neeraj and Bishop from St. Stephen's also be ready. Their presentation is yes.
Very good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to present on analyzing non-linear dynamics of this data using reservoir computing. So the first thing I would like to start is with there are many systems in nature, be it physical, chemical, or biological, or even climatic models that are non-linear or complex. And because of their non-linearity, it's extremely difficult to analyze them analytically, especially when we want to study them under some new conditions of very time. Uh, so that makes us to ask the question, if data-driven methods can be used to predict such dynamics, and if yes, how efficient it could. So the model I have taken for the study is something called a boost data model, which is a theoretical model of automatic oscillation reactions. And this is represented by these two equations where U and V are the concentrations and A and B are the varying parameters. Okay, so the behavior of this model can broadly be classified into uh, exactly classified into two behaviors, that is the steady state regime and the oscillating regime. So the transition, I mean, when the model is in steady state and it transits to the oscillatory regime, their bifurcation, the point where the bifurcation occurs is something we call the Hall bifurcation, and it is represented by this equation P is equal to 1 plus A squared. So by these conditions, we can classify the steady state regime and oscillation regime. And this is basically a representation of what I just said. So the concentrations are plotted with time using logarithmic methods. And this is being plot the concentrations against themselves. It is something we call a phased plot. Same thing is being done for oscillating regime. And in here, the phase plot, no matter what emission condition you take, will always settle into a unique limit cycle. And yes. So the approach so the approach I have used here is something called reservoir computing, or more specifically, echo-state networks. So this is basically a data-driven method in where we want the system to learn the dynamics and predict the dynamics without explicitly solving the governing equations using RC4 or any other method. So the key idea is to pass the input through a non-linear phase reservoir, and it helps in capturing the non-linearity, the complexity, or even the longevity, and if the model is not hit. And thus only the output layer is trained, like from the whole out of the whole reservoir, only the output layer is trained, which makes it computationally very rich. Diving more into the architecture, it really consists of three main components: the input, reservoir, and output layer. So basically, what the game does takes the input and maps it into a higher dimensional space. And reservoir is responsible for introducing that not updating the timestamps and introducing that non-linearity into the system. And W out is responsible for taking the reservoir states and mapping them to make the final predictions. Like it knows how to map the reservoir state to the final predict designable outcomes. So that's the whole structure, and by the way, to for this algorithm, for even this algorithm, I have specifically used a library called reservoir pattern. And these are the simulation parameters. By the way, the bifurcation is going to be 2 for our state because I've already said A as 1. And B is taken to be any random value, and it's greater than 2, which means that we are in the oscillating zone. So these are the parameters, and reservoir size to from reservoir size to randomization parameter. There are the innocent hacking parameters which are actually optimized according to the model, but I have taken them from my research. So talking about the prediction modes, firstly we will start with the teacher prediction mode, which says that suppose I created till some time 80, I'm not sure that trajectory of training, but it's trained till some time 80, and after I wanted to predict it what will say. So what happens is I give it an input at some time t after training. It predicts using that innocent algorithm at some t plus 1. And then I again give it an input using the answer for at t plus 1. It makes prediction as t plus 2. So that is quite evident that if this kind of algorithm is going to be very accurate and this level of stack values are extremely small. The more interesting case is something called autonomous prediction. Again, the same thing we created till we discarded some initial time, and now we wanted to make the predictions forgetting what we are actually doing. So that is to integrity. It did something at some time t, and after that it takes its own output as input and predicts at the next time. So here how the whole directly goes without explicitly solving the equation. And again, the root mean square values are also response. Now we move on to something called parameter generalization. There we want to state that we don't want the reservoir to just learn the dynamics and predict it, but we also want it to learn how the dynamics is changing with the varying parameter values. So here I'm varying the parameter t specifically. And suppose now I'm training it for 3D values. And here we make a slight difference in our model that not model the algorithm. Previously, we were feeding into the input USD. Now we are feeding into the reservoir U, V, and P because we want the reservoir to learn how it should act with P, how it should turn the dynamics with P. And that's why it's made three values. And for any library habitat values from two to three app tables, I've shown some phase plots where the green trajectory you can see is the real limit cycle described sort of this is before. And the dotted one is the orthodox bridge. So you can clearly say they actually quite overlap well. These are for some other variables. It kind of fails at 2.9. It is able to predict the oscillation, but not overlapping. That is something because when you go too much outside the regime, the qualitative behavior of the dynamics is changed. I mean, it's still oscillatory, but the peaks become higher and the values become lower. So it's kind of a very that kind of dynamics it has never solved any training. So it is able to make the oscillations valid, but it's not able to fit them. So this is just to sum up with the whole like the whole behavior of the model if it's able to copy. So I've done autonomous prediction using the same for each B value and the classification time is being constructed using autonomous prediction and this is with the RP tool, which do look very similar and the classification point is also very similar. And some limitations I came across is the integration because of the reversal feedback of orthodox prediction. And we also saw for that case for 2.9 case that the performance degraded as it moved far away from the validated training regime. So it tells us that model is able to generalize well locally but struggles a bit with extrapolation. So it's not gonna happen if you train it for 2.3 annual predictions for 3 or 5 it can be prediction verified in the sense if you train it for some values it has to be seen. And yeah, came to the conclusion that it is successfully able to learn and predict the dynamics and it generalizes to unseen parameters. It gave us the trajectory for the parameters of D, it never saw the rating. And the last one, it actually is not a property of the system, but the property of the model itself, that no matter from whichever ancient country you start, it's always going to end up in a unique limit cycle. So here also, here also, it's very evident for this particular graph that the real prediction it starts from somewhere else and the autonomous starts somewhere else, but it always converges into the example. So that what is when the case is captures and hence it's done.
Yeah. So, so you only on the end result, right? As you said, the training is done on the outcome, right? Uh, there has to be one-to-one mapping to other parameters. That is not an issue. There has to be one-to-one mapping with uniqueness involved. If two possible inputs can give the same output, okay, you will have ambiguity, right? When you try to map looking at the result for the parameters. Is that
No,
some
actually,
difficulty real or is it helped by the also including the gradients, the rate of change in your in your phase diagram? Okay, suppose one of the axes was the outcome, other one was the input, right?
no, no. None of this has got it. Nowhere is the training part. It's just the prediction, the actual prediction, and what it actually looks like when we solve it by output.
Yeah. So I'm saying you're on any part of it, okay, and you're trying to predict. You don't know which part of it you are on, the upper arm or the lower arm, for a given value of one of the parameters. How do you resolve that? Will you also look for the gradient, which will resolve it based on where
So you can plot the with the time axis.
Correct.
Yeah.
Given the time, there is a certain way it proceeds along the. Yeah.
That is great because the way I took the board, it was like something it started from the initial conditions of both of these equal to point three. It ran active code for that. And after it left and I started the testing part. Suppose for some value 2.6. So when I applied that active code is continuation from that point only from starting. So the additional points have changed. That's why the plot isn't matching exactly with the
No, I understand.
that's why
What I understand. I'm talking about the multi-valueness of Urdu. Okay? For any one value of, that will pick up on another axis. I will have one more question, but we time for this later. Please go.
Regarding single recently with Gartner's trade, what is the data within this trade?
it was so certain input signals which are UFP and I trained that using I want the reservoir to see how is it solving the system using RP4 in the time release.
Only the three equations to start and two equations to start. So you're feeding the data really close to equations, getting the data and feeding it. Go back to the slide. Can you show the hybrid the reservoir connection? So, I do like to do the validation around, right? You use it for some fixing of the reservoir and also measuring the logging and the records, right? So, are you damaging the inputs to the reservoir or?
Exactly. But all the connections in the reservoir are always random.
The other profession is not. You had a question.
Yeah, it's the time for this.
That's
Uh, you mentioned about this recursive error growing, right, as a concern. Uh, does it help to use the part that is already available for which we have more information to refit and refine the parameters before you make the prediction? The newer prediction uses all the information that is gathered from all the previous ones. Although each one of them you have done the prediction. Okay? But now that that set is available, then you go for a refined model, which helps you in better predicting, and that will have less of the recursive
So you need
combination of.
something like this, but after some time step, I connect the data.
It's all the history.
Now.
Once in a while, at least.
Yes, yes, yes. When you use times in user tools that are taken for this string system, so I predict it's actually it's just a random number for different it for different models can it can be different because here it's actually not 80 when I defined the parameters, I took it from 0 to 80. And I essentially discarded some time 20. So the warm-up time 10, which is also discarded time. That is the discarded time. The recital is symbolic. So it's just the training time is 50 and prediction horizon is 40. I just noticed that when you train it for a lesser number of times, it's not able to make prediction with accuracy. And it varies a lot with model. That means there is a prediction time period between the for this two words should not mark that in this nation. Where has to be particularly behind the innovation and what is the minimum time to practice while for this society? So we are able for the batch possibly it's it won't work into two values that also depends on one another.
That we don't, you put that separate over here. We can value after optimization for the research. So, like, the time for that you working on the work or
Thank you much. Now, like called Nurture Bhatt and Rishit Kumar from St. Stephen's College. They are presenting on the topic stochastic modeling of ink dispersion in porous media via bias diffusion limited and replaced.
We want to finance into the Dutch and this find and my friend now where the beginning the stochastic modeling of in this person and so on media via bias diffusion limited aggregation basically by being the diffusion is like movement of particles found higher concentration to lower concentration. And the diffusion follows a smooth way to follow because the smooth surface and smooth flow. But microscopic what finds see the in doesn't follow like this because the in microscopic world the diffusion pattern becomes irregular and it becomes kind of unpredictable. And this is what we try to do a simulation based on this question like how can do the microscopic level the particle moves and how they how can it shape their form. This is why we want to convey term called diffusion limited aggregation, which predicts the model like fractals because fractals are irregular pattern and in microscope level the in also follows the irregular patterns. So in this model, the particles move randomly as diffusion and in all of the ground in motion. And what we implement that like finite particle is the particles formed from the center. And there will be a region, a certain region, and in certain region, there will be more particles formed. And from the center of the particle, it will move randomly until it have a contact with other particles. When it has contact, it will just become a cluster. And so on, which will so repeated and repeated, and it will form a good shape. Is the legal paradigm like equation from the fixed cost law, which describes the spreading of a particle as the in the form. But here we are trying to like to show that it doesn't always follow the fixed cost law, and the particle moves RMS RMS velocity like spreading and then for the factors, we use the two methods like box counting for geometric view and that's getting completely equal. So this is the simulation method we are using, and this is the flowchart about simulation and the library we use. And the library is the number library and number because of the Python not so fast as a simulation, so we use number to speed up the process. And this is the parameter in the size, the read of the Canvas were taking over moving around the sensor size, the amount of particles bringing spawn radius, and in radius because some particles will spawn spawn outside of the radius, so we just delete it because it is not the others it is not simulation. So the update every 30 particles, the solution will update and simulation. It's that's on the free time space out from randomly chemicals. From diagrams, this is the result is given from the definition that I have user and we use 5,000 articles to pass this result. The math behind it was using methods to find out of fractal analysis was the cost counting method and math scaling method, in which the fractal analysis formula was equal to log n upon p log r, where n is the number of boxes of the grids which these are the unit grids which we put on into the structure, find out how much boxes it takes to cover this structure up. And R is the size of these unit boxes. And the mass event is actually just making the radius around the number of particles, the fractal formation, and finding out how many particles are there in a certain radius. And these are the two methods from which we were able to confirm that the formation we were getting was actually a fractal formation. The real world impacts of this are the absorption and that is how the speed goes in the body and where that in absorption soil moisture movement when water gets absorbed by the soil, how it gets diffuses in the soil. Um, as emulsification was a simple version of a complicated process, as it did not include fuel dynamics, nor did it take the fire structure into account. For example, if you put some water onto the structure and have taken this fire structure into account, or if you put it on the story now, you don't have to take it into account. You could have taken rather simple basic kind of structure for which you could have used in conclusion. Generative structure is practically the fractal dimension obtained from 1.5 to 1.7 actually perform the scale median through the disproportion of the porous medium down to fully explain the simple diffusion. Both geometric forms counting and physical mass scale analysis of consistent. These are the references we use.
Judges.
These are normally fractals come out from deterministic equations, all linear equations. In your case, one part is purely random, random off the nothing. What about the paper? You're saying you if you can to just speaking or something else. So what was the particular model of paper you can use? Paper. Yes, paper. what of this is particular when you're using sticking that you use screw parameters to characterize what happens in the block.
Paper, we're taking that one that the paper is not taking from, we're not taking the file.
That is also random completely. That's what it. But the thing is, the equation of
What is the diffusion equation on which I to
yes, yes. Loading the spectral maybe an artifact or something else. If they're not there, use that.
Okay, the couple of things, your use of you know, seeing the spread by using boxing, right? You underestimate the fine scales, right? Very small scales to deliver spectrum. You account for that? You know, just like the nature of the size of the box will simply wash away anything that's smaller than that. Theoretical. The dimension is there, it should be like between the one and two digits. So it's not okay. No, but can it be anything? No. We have to be specific expectation. Yeah, we expected it to be like one. Less than two understandable, more than one. Like between the 1.6 in the start. I see. What was the basis for it? What was the key consideration that suggested it should be in that neighborhood? We made a paper and there's that it should be like between these. Is that experimental or was it theoretical? In your statement that that the scale in nature is nothing to do with the actual value, right? Or is it what to do with? When you refer to a particular value or saying the scale invariant, I thought all factors between scale invariant, right? Thanks.
Like on the app, I use the app. Because this bond areas as well as the areas, right? So, because you are doing that, if you don't get the license of manufacturer and particular iterations targeting the point, right? So, would it be a better algorithm if you take the points that really reach the center points and place that those center points? Because if you consider like randomly starting to feel of the same thing, like for example, is this particular reading I have started the point?
We just learn things because we just giving the values which we get the paper. Because it's still giving like there's a lot of deviation, but it can just closer to like 1.5 to 1.8. Other we didn't know that this is the internet is one Indian one, so we use this.
We use them to create the box paper graph. Questions to the audience?
Would you try to check if the experiment, the papers check experimental time, what is the time involved? And then we check between the parameter and the actual time of this portion to consider.
Today is pretty like as solid not easy, they use to face the factor parameter. Yes. We just
This is the damage just once.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much. Now I would like to call Siddharth Rathod from Tirunelveli College for presenting on the topics nonlinear dynamics.
And I think that this is the data report is coming from the Oriental College Department, and I have performed this independent study, computational study on the chaotic properties of a double pendulum, and then further generalized it to a more pendulum to study its chaotic properties. Uh, So these were my aims. Like, first idea I came to see was about classical chaos. Classical mechanics in general, if you look at it, the mathematics, it would not give a sense of randomness. But as we go on and the system gets complicated, there's a sense of randomness that seems unpredictable. So that is one of the questions that got me for time. And then I came along with the concept of non-linearity as the system gets complicated, as we look at the series of pendulum that's a linear system and easily predictable, but as it gets more complicated, the randomness increases. And uh, I thought using a centralized system came to me because I my solving this problem, and I figured it would be a very attempt to understand statistical models and fundamental behaviors in more complicated systems. Because what I'm really trying to do is increase the degree of freedom in the classical sense. So moving on, this is the mathematical model we specifies region and Lagrangian approach that calculated the Lagrangian, applied the principle of extraction and then foil Lagrangian and it came up with this equation of motion for a double pendulum where I generalize theta as angular displacement and theta double naught and theta supreme naught and the acceleration and velocity. I have also generalized the length of computation performed. Further moving on, uh, for an n system, I use these two equations that make the problem quite easy. And using these equations, I use requested technique uh, to further come up with these equations. This is the kinetic energy of the system, generalized system, and potential energy. And here, as you can see, this is the specific mass matrix that I use. The idea of using latent mechanics was to get into the computational part. It's not a calculus, it's very complicated calculus problem anymore. Rather, a matrix problem for the algebra problem. So this is the mass matrix, and uh, this was something that took quite some time. And this is the final equation of motion that I came up with for the generalized system. And as you can see, this is the final equation in terms of matrix, and it quite represents the second law of motion given by Einstein. Moving on. With these equations in hand now, I simply put out the mass terms, identify those, and perform some simple computations and calculate some simple graph. So the resistance for these was I took the length of both the masses to be same, that is one, and the values of mass as well one. And the initial condition that I gave was I started with the highest energy configuration that is possible and started with the pendulums at 90 degrees with zero angle velocity. Um, the graph is visible. The graph is really visible, so it means of measuring. So this is the phase diagram that I plotted with uh, omega and theta, angular velocity and so till now this was just classic mechanical problem. Now I introduce the chaotic part of the here. So the first thing that I tried to understand using this was the universality of first I calculated the life of the exponent for in a simple way, quantify the chaos or randomness for each motion with different initial conditions and error contributions. And here, as you can see, the graphs converge at the same point. What I've done over here is introduce errors and increase the magnitude of that error by a small factor. And initially, the graphs tend to run parallel. And after a certain point of time, they converge or at least tend to converge. Which was a simple explanation that chaos is not a property that is determined by the conditions that you provide to the system. Rather, it is something that is very built into the physics of the system we choose to study. Again, something I played around with that is the Lamppool exponent or the quantification of chaos with uh, the changes of mass. Here, I use the initial angle of the first walk to be around 120 degrees, and the second walk was at rest. So this sort of configuration, and then again we came up, I came up with these plots. This is something that is interesting. The pointer sections of uh, the double pendulum. Here, I identified a critical energy state that is boundary condition where chaos is not uh, completely visible, but it is starting to show its characteristics, and it is the first low energy configuration where the energy of the system is quite low and chaos isn't quite in the system and increase the energy. Uh, okay. So, so this, uh, okay. Okay. So, as of increasing the ability of the system, so yes, the randomness is more and more visible. Uh, Next thing that came was scaling it up to a factor of 4. And this is something that I'm working on right now. And I hope to come up with more interesting results and findings about it. And uh, yeah, this is a simple simulation plot of 4 work pendulum. It's, as you can see, is quite chaotic and random. And it's a base portrait of the 4 work pendulum. And so, yeah, in this small independent study, I've come across a few uh, findings or conclusions, if you may. That is the universality of chaos or therefore now exponential. Uh, Something that is very built into the physics of system as in when it's more and more complicated. The synthesis of the mathematical model and the equations that I use, and I've come to the finding that they are quite accurate. And some another conclusion that I came up with was the philosophical implementation of chaos theory in nature. I mean, no matter how hard we try, this some part we will find that randomness just shows its time, and it's kind of a universal thing, I believe. So that's it. Thank you.
It's you showed this lots of analysis in plots, right? Uh, you made a comment about the meeting point, right?
Yes,
And you said that they are saying for you know, across.
yes, yes. They tend to converge, yeah, at a specific point after a certain time.
Correct. And then the diversion will be there. Right. What is the physical meaning of that point? It was some point in time, right?
Yes,
And of course, it was some sigma. Right.
so this plot, what I'm trying to say over here is this is nothing but basically the quantification of chaos. And physical interpretation would be that after a certain
The
point,
interpretation of the crossing. Of course.
yes,
It's the whole time understand.
the physical interpretation could be that the systems tend to show similar behaviors after a certain point of time with smaller deviations. As you know, the deviations are larger, but the deviations or the variation in the pattern of motion of the past they take are decreasing with the increase.
Yeah. I was really referring to your comment on the crossing of the same point, like somewhere between 15 and 20 seconds or 20 seconds. What is that kind of with the scale of the system that you're taking and the assumptions of initial velocity or acceleration, whatever the parameters that go in? Would you a different scale system, would the time be different? Or is it some universality about
Uh,
and that is reaching the saturation by 20 seconds? Wouldn't be, but there's no.
I guess that is not. Yes.
Even the single factor, there's no linearity. It has sine theta, which approximate b theta to the implementation theta. In the single factor, also we have
That is the question.
use the simple right intuition conversion for a single factor. You get ideal side.
Yes.
That will be approximately that sine theta with three doesn't implementation. Believe me. That's why it's very low for small numbers.
Yes, sir.
Deep side theta, it's a no implementation.
Yes, sir.
So we single factor also a specific.
Sir, speaking purely from mathematical terms, it can be classified into a chaotic system, but uh, we have a tendency to classify chaos as something which is more random, and so usually these sorts of systems come across to be more chaotic and more now.
So would this be an example of deterministic chaos?
Yes, sir, I
Well,
The audience can also ask any questions. Um, Thank you so much. I would like to call Abhinav Tomar from a first year from Ramjas College, fourth year from Ramjas College. He'll be presenting on the topic analysis of financial cascading using quantum algorithms.
Now, I would like to give you a case study of financial therapy. Around 1999 and 2000, American market hit with the growth of bubble burst. And after that, there was the 9/11 attack. After those two big incidents, the American market was struggling with falling of stock prices and everything. So, but Federal Reserve did they reduced the interest rate. So people started taking more loans and everything. And so, due to this freedom that people took so many loans, banks started to become more influential. Banks started to become like they started giving more loans, or even for the people who are not credible for the loan to get loans. So this started to become a big problem. It wasn't obvious for this Asian state, but it uh, international level market crash in 2008. Now, why we are trying to study these market crashes is because they are highly non-linear in their structures. Now, what happened in 2008 is Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. Due to that bankruptcy, after one institute was another failure, all the other institutions that were dependent upon it, they started paying too. So this is like cascade chain. It doesn't stop until some certain numbers of institutes. It travels around the big market. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to stimulate these cascading effects using quantum mechanics and try to find the configuration of the certain institutes which government can actually choose to bail out to avoid these cascade effects or to avoid these kind of market tensions. Now the type of market that we are going to study is the Indian curve and lesser market. Now this market has some interconnected structure. Look at this figure. So this figure shows that firm one and firm two they are interconnected with each other. So they have some interchangeability with each other. They have also holds external assets. So so the complete market value of an institute it becomes a function of cross holdings. These three metrics represent the cross holdings of the institute. This B is the market value. So this is like a coupled equation of B. So this B, the P of I institute will divide into the market value of the J institute, and this B is the direct ownership of institute on other assets. So you can come up write the market value of such an equation which contains this I minus C inverse. Okay. So what we try to get is that we encoded this problem of maximum cascading. So if one institute is set to failure, all the other institutes that are dependent upon it will go towards the failure. Now what you will do is that you can model this failure or this cascade effect with the Eiffel model. Eiffel model is a type of solid state model. You can encode the coordination between institutes into the Eiffel model parameters of the interconnection in the local magnetic field. You can formulate your problem into a hypothesis problem.
And then we calculate the cascade, or you can tell that how many students are actually going to pay due to certain initial benefit. So let's look at the anatomy information. Now, how we according to our problem as is that we have selected binary important. So if an institute is paying, we say it is one, and if it is zero, if it is not paying, then we say it is zero. So we converted the institute states into the space state of proper as important. Okay. So how you can export this problem to iPhone is that by you can write this whole thing as an energy grid. So this first term it regards the failure. So if an institute is going to fail, then it's going to reward failure in education. So because you want to find the actual maximum cascade contribution, it's going to reward them. The second term it forces a condition. If one student is dependent on the other student, we want that certain threshold. That threshold is decided by AIG. So if an institute is dependent on the other institute, more than a certain benefit, and if that threshold fails, the other one is also going to fail. So this second term writes that condition. And this third term is the efficient cascade scheme. So I am going to initially create one institute, and that institute is going to decide what the trajectories of the cascade. So even the results of these are the results of the mapping cascade. This is the magnetization. You can see the whole system magnetization. It goes towards a certain increase as the interconnection between the institutes increases. So if these are the institutes here, and if the interconnection between them increases highly, then the magnetization progression total magnetization signifies the state of the market. So if the magnetization is completely good, that means the total market is under that it's completely good. And if the total magnetization is zero, that means the market is safe. So you can see magnetization went towards one as we increase the relation between the institutions. And the other physical physics-based insights are just subjective of how susceptible each institute are for a given threshold of a given period. But again, so is the energy against the energy reducing the whole the energy going for reduction and it goes to negative value. So this signifies that the minimum energy state is actually the maximum cascade oriented of the maximum cascade configuration. Fourth one is the heat capacity. You can see that like the heat capacity also signifies the physical state of this whole market. It's a physics very inside, but you can find one correlation between physics and the market because they have converted physics from market into the isochronism. So the heat capacity also has a similar behavior that's better. So second one is the optimal bailout flow. Now once we have calculated the cascade, we want to find out which institute to actually bail out. Governments want to know which institute should I give money so that they can survive in what cash could be prevented. Now this program we also coded it from a bicycle. And then we sorted out the ground state of the bicycle using quantum analysis. So this program is binary because I want to reduce the magnetization and then I want to calculate the force maximum cascade. So this contains this now this initial terms it minimizes the trade-offs amount of money which are put into trade-offs. And the other term is going to enforce the cascading and the third term it drives how much budget I have. So it enforces the budget percentage. So that my current application it doesn't close the budget constraint. It stays in the current constraint. This is the results of the trade-off. You can see after before the trade-off the magnetization was really high. And after the trade-off, you can see the magnetization has reduced so that meaning that the institutes are towards survival. And since the the trade-off susceptibility and value of optimization, review algorithm is a classical algorithm. It gives 63% of the optimal cascade results which we calculated. The results are still yet to be calculated for this one. But these are other insights that we can find out like data of susceptibility and the quantum acceleration of the various inside the model. So if I want to serve like so this quantum expression tells me if I'm betting out certain signal, how is that quantum going to affect the whole market? So I will those institutes which are affecting all the other institutes as well. Now, point to any favor. This needs to be understood. So what we did is that we made the Hamiltonian of our actual physical laws. Now, we are minimizing the energy of that Hamiltonian, and that minimum energy configuration is giving me the optimal solution. Now, how this actually done is that we encode our program into a time-dependent Hamiltonian function. So this is the driver Hamiltonian, as driver, and this is the control Hamiltonian. This control Hamiltonian, it contains the power program. So uh, this is like this. The total Hamiltonian time it's time better, and it goes something like this. So what we says the edge drivers plus s program. So as my scheduling increases, the driver Hamiltonian it goes plus zero, and it ends up in my total Hamiltonian. Now this uses a theorem and theorem from quantum mechanics. The theorem is quantum adiabatic theorem. Now, quantum adiabatic theorem says that if I start with the Hamiltonian of my initial program, and if I slowly perturb the system very slowly, by very slowly I mean that the energy difference must not be different more than the energy of the first and the ground state differences. So if the time is less than that difference, then the Hamiltonian is going to be into the ground state. They start in the ground state of this driver Hamiltonian, they will end up in the ground state of the program Hamiltonian. So this driver Hamiltonian so this driver Hamiltonian creates the superposition so that my problem searches for the space, and then at the time of this is only my search goes towards the purple grid. So it ends up towards the grid of the grid. These are the classical complexity and other analyses that we can do based on the tree grids and the graph theory. And these are the continued part. Yeah, the gap to conjugation. Since now we can convert the program into a graph or a tree, we can do further analysis of conductance and tree grids. So this gives us more insight that would not be possible if we were trying to solve this program with any other classical algorithm. And this is the pilot problem that we try to solve. It's a market equilibrium problem. For a given cascading effect, we are trying to find the equilibrium at which the market values are going to end up. So for a given perturbation, the market values are going to change, and then they will end up at a certain equilibrium. We are only trying to find the equilibrium. Now, this problem, this formation is highly non-linear because of the penalty. Penalty only instructs after institutes have paid a certain threshold. Because of this non-linearity, these problems are NP. Now, that's why we cannot solve them with any non-classical algorithms. Simply, we have to import them into such problems so that we can solve them with AI's way. These are the results of the market equilibrium. You can see that the frequency of the ground state is maximum, and it shows that the configuration associated to this energy it's the maximum. So this is the ground state, and that configuration will give me the final energy. And this one.
Now we move to Python.
I was thinking of rating your qualification and the problem formulation to more of this the way the financial markets look for the idea of leverage financial markets. Leverage. That is very cool. Basically, it means that if I have a rupee in financial markets, I can use another rupees. So what it means, but I think that the rupee now, people say that this is very important. All the regulation is benefits of the rich as a skill. So where is the liquidation part taken?
The specific market that we have described here is very simple. There are certain institutes, they hold cross holdings with each other, and they also hold some assets. So if some assets price changes because of some asset like war or any other physical we are working
No,
on.
asking what it is, I'm not asking to describe the model. I'm asking, is this fact of limits and the model taken into the model? Something.
No, these are-
some parameters like taking that.
We have not approved by
So you will do the The second question is that there's also in the physics of Bayesian model, which has a lot in the evolutionary theories. Yes, sir. Which deals how you deal with universe with it. So have you explored that part of the
No, sir, this is simple 2D classic models. So there are two dimensions. So that is type.
how many fields levels, how many institutional relationships are involved?
So for there are any institutions say so there will be encroach and correlation matrices. So you can understand you can think of them and that is twice with certain interaction.
Relationship in face of every group. And then we talk about the bond, right? And when you get that, you know, also you have prefrontal loss, right? Can you go back to the side where you were showing the structure of the body?
First one.
Yeah.
This one.
So, sorry. If you're trying to like find the critical size for the calculated and for the local acid calculation, there are approximately by considering three like structure. We call that.
It doesn't have to be clean structure. It can be cyclic structure. So if institutions are interdependent with cyclic, it can be this type of structure. It doesn't have to be a simple like tree-like structure. So this cyclic this cycle is what actually makes the failure a stopping kind of effect. So this keeps on failing. The loss keeps on pushing towards the
Have you like considered that each form is related to regular forms?
yeah, these institutions are connected to a very I think it's not shown in the diagram here, but if you can see these lines. These lines, these shows that these institutions are interconnected with each other, and these lines show that there are external assets they own as well.
So, whether there's a declaration of bankruptcy or bailout,
Yes, sir.
although you might define some criteria for it, so that would be sort of that action.
We define
In practice, it's a win for final, some other element might
Yes, sir.
influence it.
it's a multi-variable actual decision.
Correct. So, that's not captured. And so how do you pick up the system after a spontaneous, flip that occurred?
Okay, so we don't
It's not driven flip.
we cannot spread it, we cannot do it in a real time. So what we have is that we have initial data, we have initial correlation between institutions. Then we can set some institute to failure. Say if I choose that this institute fails, then I can calculate the maximum contribution.
You can advise based on what is profitable and so on. But the decision might, may not take that into account alone. And something else might decide whether it's a bailout or the bankruptcy declaration. In which case, how do you pick up the bond from there from your predictions?
So in the case of bailout, we take those institutions to bail out, which minimizes the energy of that.
That is the advice that you would give
It's
by optimizing it. But then somebody overrides that consideration.
So
And something is bailed out when it was not profitable. Okay, then what happens?
So if something is bailed out when it's not profitable, you can think of this as like spin. So if I upspin this, if I apply external magnetic field which has flipped this spin, so this is like a Faraday machine. Now this spin goes, this is spin goes, this is spin goes affect, and this is also affect this. So this is going to be like another new configuration because of this action. So this might end up in some say.
So do you look at immediate profit and loss or long-term effect of that?
No, sir,
Saying it will lead to catastrophic.
We actually find out the downstate. So there will be no more changes after the downstate. So at this configuration, I'm certainly sure that if I take these actions, this will be the minimum spending I have to do. to prevent the failing. So this is these things that I will
Thank you so much. Now let's head for refreshments. Let's take a short break, and we'll take a group photo outside. I think it's for 15 minutes. We'll take a break for 15 minutes. Evidently.
Yeah.
So I welcome you all back from the break. So now I would like to invite Aryan Jain from St. Stephen's College. He's a second year and he's presenting on the topic quantum mechanical model for financial market. So, when we used to model quantum mechanical model for financial markets, initially, what the researchers did was they just took stationary financial models which do not vary with time, and also they didn't take into account the war and the pandemics that happen and the way they affect our financial market. So in this model, what I've done is I have included the pandemic and war terms so that we can predict the financial markets better. So for that, first of all, these are just some basic calculations that we have to do. First of all, we calculate the long returns, and then we calculate the Z factor, Z score, which basically non-dimensionalizes this equation so that we can solve all the Schrodinger's equation. So initially, in my model, what I'm going to do is I have included this V memory term, shock term, and the potential and the memory term and the potential and the shock term. So these terms are included in order to handle wars and pandemics better. So with this, our final solving non-linear solving equation looks like this. So in order to find out these potentials, I have used some quantitative ideas of Lorentz shock terms. Lorentz shock term is coming from the Lorentz attractor model. Basically, the Lorentz attractor model is a bound state chaotic system. So in that, we are also saying that our final market comes towards the mean, which is zero returns. So it is actually bound to the zero return state. So we have qualitatively used the Lorentz shock term, and this term is actually derived by me only, and this is not you won't find it anywhere else. This is my own creation. And secondly, the power law memory term. The power law basically is the some a to the power minus x sort of a decay. So here I've taken omega to the power minus I, and I've taken the log of that because of the fact that we are dealing with the log terms. Now the non-linear potential term. So in order to deal with the non-linearity of this behavior, I have considered game theory model. Basically, what happens is this non-linearity comes into picture when the trader when the trader holds the stock with itself. So other traders also follow that shepherd. Which actually shows that the market influences itself and market follows the trend. So by using game, here A is the A and B are the base prices that we get from these payoff matrices, and G stands for term the hurdle term, which actually models the hurdle behavior, or you can say the shepherd behavior. So for simplicity, I can assume that the wave pattern are almost equal, and this P factor is less than one. So, by using these as approximations, we derive that our non-linearity term comes out to be something like of this form, which is g psi square xi. So, computationally, how we deal with this is basically we discretize. We can't solve. Computer doesn't know continuous basis, so we have to discretize the equation. So we use discretization method along with the Crank pressure algorithm in order to solve this differential equation. So here I have taken the example of three companies basically. The first company is CCL, which is Carnival Corp Limited, Boeing Airlines,
and the third is data analysis. So basically, what I'm here modeling is during the COVID-19, these companies were severely affected in their returns because all the airlines were dropped and travel across abroad was very limited scenarios. That's why I had used these. That's why I use these companies only as an example so that I can check out whether it's good for modeling the corona period or not. So as you can see, uh, there what we are actually doing is we are calculating this Z score. So what we are actually modeling is the bounce. The green line represents our quantum mechanical model, and these blue lines represent the actual behavior of the market. Uh, for that market given, I use the data from Y Finance. Y Finance is Yahoo Finance, which is a very popular stock pricing option where we can see the price of the stock and the necessary details. So this empirical model comes from that, and our quantum mechanical model is shown by the screen line. So what we are actually doing is we have to see when our Z score, if whenever our model Z score is very high, for example, in this region -3 to -6 and -3 to -6, we have to basically deal with that because that actually represents high profit or high loss terms. So we have to actually not have properly deal with only these terms which are near to the zero because that basically means zero returns. So we are not be more focused on that. We have to actually model that where are those where can we get the losses or where we can get the profits so that we can minimize it in the future. So here, as you can see, our quantum mechanical model fits very well in the lower domain region for cognitive cop. Also, for the going airlines, as you can see, our model is quite able to trace out, or you can say it is overlapping with the bounds that we see across here. So from -0 -6 region because those are the actual important bounds that we have to deal with. And similarly, we have got the data for Delta Airlines. So you can see that Delta Airlines has many work because of the fact that this has a lot of non-linearity. That means data stores a lot of stock with them, and so the shepherd behavior continues, and that is why there are a lot of bugs, and our model is able to handle and trace them very well. So benefits and limitation of this model, if I talk about, which is the tail risk capture. First of all, as I shown that it is at the tail, which is actually when our probability density goes near to the zero, it is actually able to model it quite well. And by using our deterministic chaos, we are actually able to deal with those non-linearities very well. And also, when I mentioned the stock traders' behavior, so it is also able to cater that using social physical integrations and the memory awareness because our our market depends upon the memory. Each company is affected by the memory of some event which happened in the past. Like for example, any company, even if now some companies have to take some time to recover from the pandemic situation or some war which happened even earlier than that. So that memory term we have also included in our framework, so it is able to handle that as well. Some limitation of the model is it is very it has to it requires a lot of computational power. Secondly, as you can see, this is not able to fit. This is not able to fit in the region beyond
beyond where our meat is there, which is equal to zero.
Electricity. It's back. It's back. Switch on the focus for again. Back so it back. You may have to go closer to the. Can somebody talk also? Bring it close to the projector. Bring the remote to the remote. Okay.
No. No. All right, so we are back. So yes. So as you can see, it is not work in the equal to zero. It is not working very well. So that is another limitation of this model. So what is the future outlook? What we can do further in this model? Basically, there is PINNS, which is physics informed neural networks, which is a network which works really well, which can work really well with these data. Basically, it is a machine learning model, you can say, and it will learn from the previous data that has been provided to it and will decide the potential. Now, I was the only one who decided the potential and for all the terms by qualitative analysis and some mathematical derivations, but this model is able to do that do that work in a more accurate manner and a more significant manner. So conclusion is by using this game theory model and Lorentz attractor model, we were able to at least deal with the tail areas where the property density is lower, but where the losses or profits are very high. Thank you.
Uh, yeah, in very simple terms, what is the single distinct advantage of a quantum modeling as a classical?
So
What is the motivation?
the motivation for it is the a non-linear behavior because in most of the models, basically when you can't deal with the chaotic behavior of the or some random pandemics or wars which happen which actually happen which affects the market a lot and causes random losses. So it is actually dealing with that by the potential that we have added. So it is able to deal with that in a systematic manner, as you can see in this
Yeah,
bird.
what classical, random, classical, non-linear,
Non-linear
classical cannot capture?
that would just mostly go like a Gaussian curve. Won't be able to handle with these bumps, as you can see in here. So it won't be able to handle those bumps, like
Okay, at least the outliers. Okay.
the outline here. Like,
Maybe after you finish the programs.
these these arrows are basically the bumps that we get. Basically, what we are doing is there's a simple Gaussian curve which we have fixed. So, and this blue curve is our actual variation of the market that happened during the pandemic years. So, and here this is slightly further over here also it is deflating. There is certain bump, but there it is not actually matching in this perfect Gaussian curve. So these bumps, so how when these how these basically are the bumps which are there from this Gaussian perfect Gaussian curve in the region -3 to -6 and +3 to +6 because of the fact here the profits and losses are way more. So we have to deal with these properly. These are just basically zero returns. So even if we don't deal with that, we know that it is zero return, it is not creating any advantage or loss.
Let me cautious represent the capital discount for that. How do you find the discount?
Yes, so bit of the Gaussian is basically how I have decided is I that is something which I saw from the I basically plotted first of all I plotted this data curve. So and then I tried my own method. I was basically changing making it into different values so that it can fit that curve. So I just put it random standard deviation values by hand as of now. So for that only, I said that we are going to use the machine learning models, which can do this job very better than just manually doing it.
Don't you think that uh, you like really the very of the works is properly where map with the actual data in a much better way. Like if we are use the machine learning tools of the task and models instead of going into the content.
That's good, but basically what we're doing is we have to. I have done that version fitting for these curves, these bumps actually so that it can actually show that these bumps. If I do that, so this will not go along with the bumps, so that we cannot actually compare the bumps and the actual data. If I just shrink this, this will not go along with the bump that we have. If I just reduce the width. My main focus here is these bumps at the lower probability region, have high Z score, high modulus of Z score.
So, I want to just continue with enough question. So what is quantum in this? Only thing I can make it abstract is that the probability is equal to square of the wave function. Otherwise, quantum systems have some very unique properties that super traditional is like all of them just work everything is not, I don't know. But so the whole logic of applying quantum, I'm not very sure whether why that is better than any cluster.
Yes. So that is a qualitative idea that basically whether a stock will grow or not, that depends upon the probability. It is not basically you can't say with certainty that it will grow or not. So that is why I use that qualitative analysis. But along with that, use different other fields of physics like our periodic system and nonlinear dynamics, as well as these power laws and other things. So it is not purely quantum, but yes, it improves some quantum stuff and we are solving the Schrodinger equations. So in that scenario, it is quantum, it is not full quantum. Question? Thank you. Finally, I would like to call Anurag Tripathi from Atmaram Sayardi College for to present on the topic how do varying levels of quantum entanglement and different noise models influence cooperation rates in the cooperation rates.
This was speaking from
Yeah. The last.
what students say.
Yes, sir.
Oh, the rocks you can't go for.
Yes.
What I said.
And take care of it.
I remember that I came across. It's based on the quantum business dilemma. So the question is at the heart of this study is this activity. How quantum entanglement can change the conflicts between business risk. First, it is the classical business dilemma. More what we are doing, we like to deal with the review of the classical business dilemma. So, but there is and real conflicts. So, there is a paradox in showing which will be counter in the which will be counter to the strategies. That is so. But I want to say that if you invent, you will from something this.
You don't want to use the microphone, it's fine, you can speak without it, okay?
Hey, that's speaking.
Let's say it's-
Uh, Hi all. With that, we bring the second day of the Meera Memorial Paper Reading Competition to a close. These 2 days, the 13th and today, have been truly wonderful days of ideas, research, and passionate presentation. And we hope it has been as memorable for you as it has been for us. A big thank you to all our participants for their hard work and dedication, and the judges for for generously giving their time and insights. We would like to inform the participants that the results for the competition will be released in the next 10 within the next 10 days. Now we would like to take a moment to deliver our heartfelt gratitude to our principal, Dr. Sangeeta, ma'am, the HOD, Hari sir, our staff advisor, and all the teachers for their constant support and encouragement throughout this academic year as we wrap up the departmental and society events for the year. Thank you all. Good evening and safe journey. Thank you.